Hey everybody, it's Jamie from Live in Rebellion, and I'm here today to share with you the story of Dr. Kathy Zhang. How's it going, Kathy?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Wanted to thank you for being here with us. We're excited to listen to you, and Kathy's going to tell us a story that she's named Transformational Trauma. Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of where the story begins.
Yeah. And first of all, I want to say thank you for having me, Jamie. So I named it transformational trauma because it felt like um, it felt truest to what my story was. So I am a physician based in New York City. I am a palliative care and hospice physician, which essentially is a field that or an approach that aims to improve the quality of life for patients. We generally tend to see patients who have serious illnesses, often terminal illnesses. And so, in general, our line of work, some people, even in the medical community, would consider it like pretty heavy emotionally and that sort of thing. Um, so I obviously in New York back in March of 2020 was kind of when the COVID pandemic was really flaring up. And it was yeah, just like absolutely um, one of a kind of an experience. Normally we have patients who, die and we would see them, you know, we would have maybe 1, 2 deaths a week or something like that. And that was normal for us
Mhm.
as a palliative care team. At the height of it, we were having 6, 7 patients on our list, just like dying a day. It was at a point where we were so inundated with patients, like we couldn't even see them before they ended up passing. And with the visitor restrictions, um, families couldn't come. Everything had to be done by phone. It was virtual. And so everything was just, we were trying to, talk with families and let them know what was happening. And it was just absolutely, it was soul crushing um, in that way. There's only so much human suffering that you can watch and absorb and try to bear witness to until it starts to really affect you emotionally, mentally, even physically. And we were all, not just us but everyone in the hospital, all going through it simultaneously, right? They don't train you for this in medical school or in residency. And so it was, you know during the surge, for the maybe 2 months that we were surging, you just kind of turn on autopilot and you're just like, I have to do this. And then when the numbers go down is when we all started really feeling the effects of it.
When you slowed down, you
Mhm.
feel what you'd been through.
Right.
How, I struggle to even find a question to ask to follow up to that, because first I feel like I need to say thank you for what you did for people. I can't imagine how challenging that must have been for you and for all the other medical people. Truly, I'm sure you've heard it a million times since then, but you all are the real heroes, deserve to be celebrated. But
Thank
you know,
you.
what helped you move through that and those really hard moments?
Um, I'll be completely honest, I was an absolute mess. Like not everyone feels that they can go into palliative care to begin with. Some people are like, I could never do that. That's just too much. I would just bring it home. And I always considered myself, I was like, you know what, I could be able to mentally compartmentalize it, be present in the moment, and then not take it home with me. But I was a mess. I mean, I'm a natural crier. I cry all the time. But I was crying like at my worst. I think it was just like 8, 9 times a day. And I would have these like heaving panic sobbing attacks where I would have to like brace myself on furniture or the sink or something like that, because the suffering was just too overwhelming. Um, I even got to a point where I was just, even briefly, I was just like, what would happen if I just didn't wake up tomorrow? Just like, I don't, kind of don't want to experience it. It was just, um, like day in and day out, we would have to just tell people that their loved one who was totally fine wasn't going to make it, or, and there would just be a lot of emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of obviously sadness, bewilderment, confusion, disappointment, like everything that you can think of. And I finally actually sought out therapy. Actually, it's, in the medical community, it's really sad to say, but you're taught to be like the provider. You're taught to be resilient. Like the patient comes first, and you just have to. That's your duty to them. You have to take care of them, and mental health tends to take a back seat. And so there's, even in the general public, there's a stigma against mental health issues, seeking out counseling or therapy. And unfortunately, even when you're in medicine, that's pronounced as well. So for me, I had to go to therapy. I spoke with a therapist who was super helpful. I was really nervous and kind of incredulous. I didn't think that I was like, oh, how's this going to help me? And I think a lot of people start out thinking that way, but she was really able to work with me to get me to a point where I felt like I could be somewhat normal, somewhat myself. Because at my lowest, I was like a shadow of who I thought I was supposed to be. And she also really worked on kind of allowing yourself to feel the emotions and not just clamping down and saying like, I'm fine. I would always be like, no, I'm fine. I don't, I'm supposed to be a professional. I'm supposed to know how to deal with this. I'm supposed to X, Y, and Z, these expectations that we hold ourselves to. And so working with her really got me to a point where I could just be like, this is what I'm feeling. I have a human heart. I have a human brain. You can't see what we see and not be affected by it.
Yeah.
So I really can't credit her and the work to really get me to that point of being able to be like, you know what, I could feel like I'm somewhat close to myself.
Right. It's great. You could see and have the courage to reach out for help when you realize this is too much to handle, and that you could kind of overcome that self-imposed barrier of, oh, I should do it myself. I should do this on my own, and reach out and connect with someone that could help you. It's tremendously courageous. I'm glad you were able to do it. And I know the next part of your story, you say it's called climbing back to zero. What happens there?
I mean, that was just months of, that was mostly the therapy sessions, right? It was months of introspection and kind of thinking about some of the traumas that I had as a kid and as a teen, and how they affected how I viewed the world and how I responded and engaged with the world, right? There was, I was bullied a lot as a kid because of my race and my ethnicity. There were a lot of latent feelings of not being good enough, not being the same as everyone else, being different. And then I also, as a teen, was very, very close to, I was in high school, like a couple blocks from the World Trade Centers on 9/11.
Wow.
And, you know, I was still in the building when they collapsed, and it was just a whole thing that I had to unpack, you know, with her. And I didn't think that starting out at therapy that I would have to unpack all these things. You don't realize sometimes how much of the experiences of your life inform who you are
Mhm.
today.
Mhm.
Good experiences, bad experiences, the whole gamut.
Mhm.
So, um, you know, it was slowly working through that and working through those feelings and the emotions that came with them, and to just, you know, have the self-compassion to say like, okay, I'm a work in progress. Like, I'm making strides to try and be just more aware, more compassionate to myself. Um, and so, yeah, that was the climb out, sort of, to speak. Getting to a point where I could feel like, all right, I feel like I'm not crying all the time. I'm not feeling hopeless. Um, and maybe, you know, I could think of something more, you know, just that little, maybe there's a hint, you know.
Yeah. Well, with all of those, you know, the living through, seeing the pandemic and being really right there, literally face to face with everyone, I can imagine how that also brings up some of these things from the past. You get back in touch with some emotions because you're just, one would be so overwhelmed. And it's wonderful that you're able to work through it with the therapist. What were some of the things you learned about yourself, or other kind of support or systems or resources that you found kind of in that moment of transition that helped you kind of move through it and get to a bit of a better place?
That's a great question. I think one thing that really helped me actually was, I joined actually a coaching program. And, you know, and again, I will be the first to admit that I, at some point, did think that coaching was kind of like, a little woo, you know.
That sounds woo. If you at first you sound pretty woo.
Yeah, I'm like, what is a life coach anyway? But you know, the thought work behind it was so instrumental to be able to tie what you're thinking to what you're, you know, to what you're feeling, to what's happening around you. um, I found a program that kind of does coaching for women physicians. There's so
Really?
many out there.
That's
Yeah,
interesting. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah.
To feel really
So
understood, I think, within your profession and the challenges that you live and confront on a daily basis that most of us in our lifetimes would never see. That's wonderful.
yeah, it is. And, you know, I really think that that helped me get to a point where I could even consider, you know, the like the beyond, not just being my regular self, but getting to a point where I'm like thinking about new business ventures, or what else I want to do with my career, what else I want to do with my life. You know, a year ago at this time, yeah, this was probably about the end of the tail end of kind of like our surge.
Mhm.
There was no way I would have thought that I was capable of, you know, coming on here to be able to tell that story. You
You're so
know,
brave.
there's
You're so awesome. Let me just
it's
say
just,
that back at you because I feel it and sense it needs to be said.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just like trying not to lose it and, you know, cry and during this interview. But yeah, I mean, that was really instrumental. Just having support from my family and friends. Oops, my light went out.
Okay. I
Um,
can still see you just fine.
Having support from my family and friends, and really some of the kind of techniques I was taught to about, um, getting in tune with your body and kind of like the biofeedback of okay, this is registering as anxiety, and how do I address that? How do I think about, um, what kind of thoughts can I cycle through to kind of quell that anxiety or panic or whatever comes up?
Yeah. How do you think, I have two questions for you. I'll ask them both at one time and then you can choose how you answer them. Otherwise I'll get so excited I'll forget the second question. So by the time you get into the first, so let's see
I know.
whose memory helps us. So the two questions are, one, when you found this community of other coaches that are medical practitioners, I'm curious how having that community of people, and I imagine some may have been there in New York through the surge, many of them went through the COVID experience in a similar way. I'm so curious how having a community of people around you that went through something so similar helped you cope and move through. And then the second question I have is, how does that process of coming back to yourself and then moving kind of beyond with these new tools through coaching, and like you said, a year ago, you wouldn't have imagined you'd even be doing the interview now. How has that informed and changed your medical practice? Because I assume you're still in palliative care. We've still seen COVID cases, and I'm sure it's much more manageable now. I would hope, at least that's what the news says. But I'm sure it doesn't cease to be overwhelming and difficult. So those are the two questions.
They're really great questions. I think I wrote notes. So the first one, I mean, the community, and again, I didn't think that I would be so transformed by the community of my peers and the people that I was with, because so many of you think that you're alone in having these thoughts and emotions and the struggles. And then you get to this community of whoever you are with, while you're getting the coaching, and you realize that everyone goes through something similar, right?
Yeah.
And it was a combination of like group and one-on-one coaching, and just you learn so much just by witnessing the breadth of everyone's lived experience. You're like, they, at the same time, it gives you strength. Sometimes you can't believe what other people have gone through. And then you're like, that must have taken incredible strength. And if they're able to make it through that, then maybe there's a possibility that I could do the same in my circumstance, right? It was just so inspiring. There were a lot of tears. There were, people were so emotional, but it was, like you said, it was a shared experience for all of us, and so powerful. The second thing that you said, coming back in, I didn't take a full break. I know colleagues who've taken like FMLA and time off and things like that, but my leadership and my boss was really great in allowing me to use my days to kind of have some sort of break. And what I think I realized coming back and being really focused and engaged now, I was really, during my kind of darker times, or when I was feeling really low, I was pretty detached, and it was just hard to focus and concentrate. And but now, it's just trying to remind myself to take time to see the humanity in people. I just had a patient who, very young male in his 30s, who, they found out that he had this terrible widespread cancer while he was in prison. And, at the outset, you'd be like, oh, young male in his 30s in prison, some people might form a judgment about that or something like that. But then you get to know him, he's just this wonderful person, and who has the same hopes and fears and dreams and as the rest of us. And so that was really important to me and really valuable for me to be like, I can still be there to support my patients, and just share in their lives with them, even just for the short time that I'm with them. So
It's really incredible.
yeah.
Do you feel like inside of you and how you see yourself, now is, how different is it than where you were, a year ago from today?
Yeah, it's, and honestly, I feel like I'm just getting started. I've felt in a way that I've been on kind of the precipice of something greater if I just allowed myself to trust myself.
Mm.
Um, but it was the combination for me of therapy and coaching to get to a point where I could imagine that there were great things out there for me, right? And
Yeah.
great is different for everyone.
Mhm.
Um, I again, I a year ago would not have ever thought that I would be in a position where I'd be on an interview, I'd be considering launching my own podcast and writing articles or all these other things that I've always wanted to do, but I was scared to do or didn't think I was good enough to share my voice or any of these things. And so that is the biggest transformation for me. It's just
Awesome.
um, yeah, it's beyond words.
I'm so moved by your story, Kathy, and who you are. You are humbled to a level that you have no right to be. I feel like you are this, you are literally a real life fucking hero. You have to know this about yourself.
Thank you.
You are, of course, you are, not just for what you've done, but for who you are and the sincerity and there's another word here I'm looking for, the sensitivity that I can feel even through the screen about how you approach life and people and your dreams. And I just have to say, I'm super excited about whatever it is that you create from all of this, whether it's a podcast or you do interviews or you keep doing your medical work and building awareness and networks and people around, medical practitioners that need support and can live more fulfilling lives, even in the midst of some of these very difficult things that you all face in the health industry. But I'm tremendously inspired and excited by your story. I know the last chapter here is called Thriving from a Place of Purpose. I don't know if there's another couple of things you might want to say around that chapter.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for your kind words. I think anytime we share stories of, anyone who's overcome adversity, I think it's so important what you're doing with trying to collect these stories and sharing them with the world, right? Because we need to hear those stories and we need to hear those experiences. Um, I think the thriving from a place of purpose, that was trying to figure out what resonated with me, like what felt true, what feels, not in your head, because again, we're trained in school, in medicine and things like that. Like you have to use your head, right? You have to diagnose, you have to figure out what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. But it's changing more and more, but we don't always feel. And sometimes even when we do, we push it aside and we squash it down and say, no, that's not right. And so for me, trying to figure out what makes me feel fulfilled, what's meaningful to me. And again, I think some of that is informed by what I do with patients, right? We ask them, what makes your life meaningful? Like, how would you want to be remembered? What's important to you? And so I had to really like mirror that back to myself and be like, okay, what's important to me? What do I want to share? What is going to be, in a sense, my legacy? Um, and so for me, that was, I'm still working on it, but it's being able to share the stories and the insights that I've learned from my time with patients who are terminally ill and share it with the world so that we can learn that kind of like clarity, that
Yeah.
we don't have to, when patients are diagnosed with a terminal illness, like there's a kind of clarity that comes, right? Like all the bullshit, it's out
Yeah.
the window, right? The first world problems. And I I really want people to be able to have that kind of clarity and that purpose that comes with being diagnosed and facing your possible mortality without having to be diagnosed with a disease, right?
Mhm.
And so wouldn't that be great?
That would be great. There's a Stoic principle around that. I forget what it's called, but it's living with death in mind, basically, and that
Mm,
allows us to create that. It sounds morbid,
yeah, it
but
does.
but that perspective, like you said, that you see in patients that have a deadline. Terrible play on words there, but you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Yeah, have
Yeah.
a diagnosis that they have a clear kind of timeline. Um, that's interesting. If you have a few things in mind, please share with us. What are some of these insights or meaningful lessons that you've picked up from these conversations with patients over time?
Oof. Um, you know, um, no one really ever says, we do a lot of patients, whether we prompt them or through their own reflection, will do what we call life reviews, where
Mhm.
they'll look over their life and think about what they've done. And it's very kind of a normal thing that happens towards the end of life. And no one really ever says like, I'm glad that I didn't, be true to myself. Or am I saying that wrong? Like they always wish that they were more true to
Yeah,
themselves.
there you go. That one I
Sorry,
understood.
like
A double negative, the mind goes, what?
yeah, I'm like, wait, did I say that right? So
That's
yeah,
okay. I knew what you meant though.
yes, yes. Everyone is like, I wish that I spent more time on the things that were important to me and not what I thought was important because of what someone else told me, what society told me, what, these extrinsic factors.
Yeah.
Everyone, these are all a lot of common things. There's also a lot of regret, regret for things that didn't happen, that they didn't do, relationships that they let either go sour or relationships that they wished were different. And, that is a reminder for me to also sometimes, and my colleagues for sure, to, you know, reach out to the people that we may have hurt in the past or the people that may have hurt us, um, and kind of work through those because it's a lot to carry through
Mhm.
life. Gosh, there's probably a lot more that I'm not thinking of because my
When you
mind
start
has
your
been.
podcast, I think this is probably a big part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
It's all up in here somewhere.
Oh, well, thank you for what you did share. I think I think everybody is innately interested in what are those lessons at the end of life we all want to know and hear. And
Mm,
people like you that work in what you work in are uniquely positioned to have a broad perspective and also a zoomed in perspective of what that looks like. So thank you for sharing that. For anyone that's listened or seen this interview today, if you were to leave them with, if they feel like your story resonated with them and they can identify themselves, even if they're not medical doctors, but in the stories that you've told, what would be one final insight or inspirational thought that you would like to leave them with?
mm. I would, I think what's been on my mind a lot recently are the things and the pleasures and that we deny ourselves. Um, Specifically, like I've been thinking a lot about bucket lists lately.
Yeah.
When people are like, I will go do this when I, turn 50, when I make this much money, when I get married. Um, and what this past year has taught me so much is that nothing is promised. And it sounds depressing. And at the same time, if you can think about it as a way to kind of lean into your own life, to say that like, I have control over, I may not have control over what happens to me, but I can control how I respond to it. I can control certain things in my life, and to really just try and do those things that you've always wanted to do, pursue the passions that, you know, made you scared, that you'd love to pursue, because, you know, at the end of the day, like, that's all we really have, right? It's being able to be present in our own lives. And so, yeah, if anyone could take away from this, that kind of notion, I think it would be wonderful.
I think that's wonderful too. Thank you so much for who you are, how you're showing up, what you're doing. I just think you're really, really, I like to drop the F-bomb in all of my interviews. You're really fucking amazing.
Oh, I curse like a sailor. I was just, you know,
Yeah,
trying
no,
to censor myself.
yeah, no, I just really thank you so much for sharing. Again, thank you for all that you did during the pandemic to help people. It makes me emotional. I think we all lived our own experiences and just admire so much the medical practitioners that were like you in there serving, helping, doing what you could. And just so grateful for who you are and what you're doing. And so glad that now you're in a place where you feel strong and are finding new passions and new hopes and new ways to serve and help humanity. So Dr. Kathy Zhang, so pleased to meet you. Thank you for participating in this interview, and I can't wait to share it with the Lemon Rebellion community.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me, Jamie. I love what you're doing with this community, and yeah, just good luck to everyone.
Thank you. All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.